Rough day, huh? Here, try this. It's not so bad.
He sat with the alien nobody would touch, and the galaxy had to rewrite its laws. Caleb Walker had been on Hesterian Exchange Station for 11 months, and in that time he had learned three things about the place. The air recyclers made everything smell like warm metal and old rubber. The diplomatic coffee was an insult to the concept of mourning. And nobody, absolutely nobody, sat near the blue-skinned girl in the corner of the cafeteria. He noticed her on a Tuesday, which on the station meant nothing except that his shift had started 2 hours early, and his lunch break was the only quiet part of his day. She was sitting at the far end of the dining hall with a tray of untouched food, her small hands folded in her lap like she was practicing the art of disappearing without actually leaving. Caleb had seen that posture before. He had seen it on his younger sister Rachel the day their father forgot to pick her up from school. The way she sat outside on the front steps with her backpack pulled to her chest, acting like waiting alone in the dark was completely fine, acting like it did not cost her anything. Caleb picked up his tray, walked past the diplomatic tables with their careful conversations and expensive uniforms, and sat down directly across from the alien girl without asking anyone's permission. The cafeteria did not stop moving, but it changed pitch. Conversations lowered by a degree. A few jeweled heads turned. Someone near the window shifted their chair without looking up, which was the station's polite way of saying they had noticed something they planned to pretend they had not seen. The girl looked up at him with large amber eyes that held too much patience for someone her age. She had pale blue-silver skin and white hair with a faint violet tint, and she was wearing the plain gray uniform of a student with no house colors on the collar, which on Hesterian Station was the equivalent of walking around with no name. "I am not allowed to sit with registered families," she said carefully, as if she were warning him before he made a mistake he could not take back. Caleb unwrapped the sandwich he had brought from the human commissary. "Good thing I am not a registered family," he said. She looked at the sandwich like it was something she had not expected to be offered. "You are human," she said. Most days he agreed and cut the sandwich in half with a plastic knife and pushed the larger piece toward her. It was chicken and bread and nothing remarkable, and he told her so, adding that it would not glow, scream, or attempt to renegotiate terms, which were all things he had learned to clarify after 11 months of alien dining. She stared at the half sandwich for a long moment. "People always ask first," she said quietly. "They always want to know my house name before they decide if I am worth the trouble." Caleb picked up his half and took a bite so she would know the food was safe. "Do I need your house name to split a sandwich?" he asked. She touched the bread with the tips of 2 fingers, carefully, like she was testing something she did not want to break. "I am Lyra," she said, "just Lyra." "Nice to meet you, just Lyra," Caleb said. This time, very briefly, she almost smiled. Across the cafeteria, a group of noble students in pearl gray uniforms watched the exchange with the particular brand of disgust that only comes from people who have never once questioned whether their disgust was earned. Their leader was a tall boy named Malirk, the kind of young man who wore his father's importance the way other people wore cologne, heavily and without apology. He caught Caleb's eye for one moment, then looked away with the slow deliberateness of someone filing information for later use. Caleb noticed and turned back to Lyra. Above them, near the ceiling junction between 2 climate control panels, a small black drone hovered with the particular stillness of something that was very good at pretending not to be there. Its lens was pointed at the table. Caleb had seen station maintenance drones before, and they did not move like that, and they did not cost what that one clearly cost, and they did not hold their position with that kind of precision. He decided that whatever the drone meant was above his pay grade, and he asked Lyra if she wanted the apple. Oh, she nodded. Oh, he split that too. The next day he told himself not to make it a habit. Stations had rules about things like proximity to noble students and involvement in diplomatic business that was not your diplomatic business. And Caleb was a maintenance technician with a badge number and a mother back in Oregon who still called every Sunday and worried when he missed it. He was not in the business of starting things he could not finish. He lasted until he reached the drink machine, which was still broken from the repair he had done yesterday, and looked across the cafeteria and saw Lyra sitting in the same corner with another untouched tray and her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the table. He bought 2 granola bars from the commissary vending panel and walked over. I fixed that dispenser 3 times this week, he said, sitting down. The station is trying to tell me something. She looked at the granola bars. What is it trying to tell you? She asked. That coffee is a privilege, not a right, he said, and pushed 1 bar toward her. She took it this time without hesitating, which felt like progress of a kind he could not measure but recognized anyway. They talked for the length of his lunch break about small things, the way the air recyclers had a specific wheeze on the lower residential ring, the fact that the station's artificial sunrise was always exactly 4 minutes late on cycle days, the particular misery of food that claimed to be one thing and tasted like something else entirely. Lyra asked about Earths. He told her about Oregon rain, about the way summer light came through old windows in a color that no station lamp had ever replicated, about his mother's kitchen, and the specific smell of coffee made correctly in a house that was warm. You miss it, she said. It was not a question. Every day, he said honestly, but the work is here. She looked at the granola bar in her hands. I was sent here to learn, she said. Learn what? He asked. People, she said, with the flatness of someone reading from a disappointing report. He waited. They do not like me, she added. He looked across the cafeteria at the noble tables, at the careful arrangement of students who sat exactly where their house colors told them to sit. Maybe they do not know you, he offered. They know enough, she said. I have no house name here. No escort, no banner, no one important claims me. Caleb chewed his granola bar and thought about that for a moment. Back home, he said, if a kid showed up at lunch alone, the decent thing was to make room. And if somebody told you not to, they could find another table. Lyra looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize, the one that meant she was filing something away in a place she would return to later. Humans speak as if rules are optional, she said. No, he said, we just argue with the bad ones once. On the 3rd day, Malirk came to the table. He crossed the cafeteria with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned the floor beneath his feet and wanted everyone to feel it. His 2 companions trailing behind him in the particular formation of people who understood their role was to be present rather than necessary. He stopped beside Lyra's chair and looked down at the sandwich half on the napkin in front of her, with an expression of theatrical concern. How touching, he said through the translator. The nameless girl has found a mammal to feed her. Lyra's fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. Caleb set his coffee down. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He looked up at Malirk with the specific tired patience of a man who had dealt with more genuinely dangerous situations than a well-dressed teenager and found all of them easier to read than they thought they were. She was hungry, Caleb said. Malirk's smile carried the particular warmth of marble. Was she, he said. Perhaps the station should place a small bowl for her near the service entrance. One of his companions laughed the sharp, careful laugh of someone who wanted credit for finding something funny, without committing to whether they actually did. Lyra stared at the table. Caleb looked at Malirk without particular intensity, the way you look at something you have already categorized. That was a lot of words, he said, to tell me your parents did not teach you manners. The cafeteria went quiet in the way spaces go quiet when something has happened that everyone will claim later they did not fully witness. Malirk's expression shifted by a precise degree. "Do you know who I am?" he said. "Nope," Caleb said and picked up his coffee. "I am Lord Malirk of House Thorn. My family secures trade corridors for half this sector. My father sits on the Dominion Advisory Circle." Caleb nodded slowly, as if receiving information of moderate interest. "And you repair food dispensers," Malirk finished. "Beverage dispensers too," Caleb said, technically. Malirk looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone recalculating a problem they thought they had already solved. Then he turned back to Lyra with the precision of a man who had learned that humiliation was most effective when it was targeted. Still performing silence as dignity, he said, "Everyone knows what silence means. It means no one claims you." Lyra's face did not change, but something behind her eyes moved, the particular flinch of someone who has been hit in a place they thought they had protected. Caleb slid the second half of the apple across the table toward her. "Eat," he said quietly. Malirk glanced at the apple. "Do humans often feed stray things?" he asked. Caleb met his eyes. "Only when everyone else forgets they are people," he said. Malirk held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable for either of them, then stepped back with the slow deliberateness of someone choosing to leave rather than being made to. He walked back to his table without looking at anyone directly, which was its own kind of statement. Lyra looked at the apple slice in front of her for a long time before she picked it up. Above the ceiling panels, the small black drone shifted its position by 3 feet and refocused its lens without making a sound. Caleb's did not look up. He finished his coffee and told Lyra he would see her tomorrow, which was the station's version of a promise, and went back to the broken beverage dispenser that had become the most reliable constant in his professional life. That afternoon, he received a maintenance alert from Auxiliary Airlock 7. The alert was marked low priority, which was the first wrong thing because airlocks were never low priority. And the second wrong thing was that the alert disappeared from his screen before the diagnostic report could load, which meant someone with access above his clearance had canceled it remotely. Caleb stared at the blank screen for a moment. He turned his cart toward the auxiliary corridor. Halfway there, he passed Malirk and 2 companions walking in the opposite direction with clean uniforms and arranged expressions, and the specific unhurried pace of people who have just finished something and want to look like they have not been anywhere in particular. Malirk noticed Caleb and offered him a pleasant nod. Caleb kept walking. At the end of the corridor, through the narrow porthole of Auxiliary Airlock 7, he saw a small blue-silver hand pressed flat against the glass. The chamber lights inside had shifted to pale white, the kind used for cold storage species, and frost was beginning to cloud the porthole from the inside. Lyra's face was visible behind it, calm in a way that scared him more than panic would have. The particular calm of someone who has decided not to make trouble even while the trouble is already happening. Caleb moved to the panel and badged in. "Rejected." Oh, he tried again. "Rejected." He dropped to one knee, pulled the access cover off the lower panel housing and started working with his hands. Behind him, Malirk's voice came down the corridor with the pleasant, unhurried tone of a man enjoying a view. "You have no clearance for that panel," he said. Caleb's did not look up. "She was cold," he said, and kept working. "If you open that door without noble authorization, you will be charged with interference in house disciplinary action." "Then spell my name right," Caleb said. The panel sparked and went dark under his hands, which meant the lockout had been at the software level, not the hardware, which meant he could bypass it the old way if he was willing to accept the damage report that would follow. He was willing. The lock released with a hard metal sound, and Caleb pulled the door open, and a wave of cold station air rolled across his boots. Lyra was sitting against the far wall with her knees pulled to her chest. She was not crying. She was doing the thing his sister used to do, holding still and waiting for the hard part to end. "I was not touching anything," she said, which was the first thing she said, and it broke something in Caleb's chest in a specific way he did not have time to examine. "I know," he said. "I tried not to make noise." "You are done waiting," he said, and took off his work jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders and lifted her carefully, because she was cold and her hands were shaking even though her face was still trying to pretend otherwise, and carried her out of the chamber into the corridor. Station security arrived 4 minutes later. They were loud and organized, and their first question was directed at Caleb rather than at the boy standing 15 feet away with clean hands and an arranged expression. This was not surprising. This was also not something Caleb had the patience for at the moment. He told them exactly what he had found and exactly what he had done and accepted the detainment without argument, because arguing would have meant putting Lyra down and she was still shaking, and he was not going to do that. They took him to a review chamber on the administrative level. The room had floating seats arranged above the floor so the officials could look down at whoever was standing in the center, which Caleb recognized as a design intended to communicate something specific about who mattered in the room and who did not. He stood in the center under the lights with his wrists in a soft restraint field and his badge crooked and his shirt damp from the cold, looking like exactly what he was, a maintenance technician who had no business being in a room like this. Malirk looked perfect. He stood beside a family advocate in dark ceremonial robes and spoke with practiced sorrow about unauthorized interference in who. See disciplinary proceedings and the unfortunate tendency of human station workers to misread cultural customs. They lacked the sophistication to understand. Caleb waited until there was a pause. "I want the airlock logs," he said. The room shifted. Director Vaughn, a narrow-faced official who held the station's administrative authority with the grip of someone who had spent decades protecting that grip, looked at him with the particular expression of someone being interrupted by furniture. "That data is restricted," Vaughn said. "The airlock system is tied to station safety infrastructure and requires formal review authorization to access." "I am maintenance," Caleb said. "I know how the backup thermal recorders work. There is a secondary log in the corridor junction that records temperature shifts, badge pings, and access attempts. Pull it." Malirk's expression moved by a fraction. His advocate cleared his throat. "The human damaged the panel that stores the primary logs," the advocate said smoothly. "Any data he is referencing should be considered potentially compromised." "The secondary recorder is in the junction housing 12 feet from the airlock," Caleb said. "I did not touch the junction housing." Vaughn looked at the security captain. The security captain looked at Malirk's advocate. Nobody moved. Caleb understood what the stillness meant. "You are not interested in what happened," he said. "You are interested in who is expensive to offend." A low sound moved through the chamber, not agreement, not disagreement, just the particular noise of people in a room where something true had been said in a place that did not routinely permit truth. Mallark's advocate stepped forward with the energy of a man who had done this before. This is precisely the instability that makes human station workers unsuitable for proximity to noble proceedings. They confuse personal feeling with legal standing. They mistake their own discomfort for evidence. "A child was locked in a freezing room," Caleb said. "The chamber limits were within survivable parameters for most registered species," Vaughn said. "Not hers," Caleb said. "You are not qualified to determine species-specific environmental thresholds." Caleb looked at him. "Neither were the people who locked her in there," he said. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the ones before it. Vaughn leaned back and folded his hands. "Technician Walker, pending formal review, your station credentials are suspended effective immediately. You will be confined to temporary holding pending transfer authority determination." Through the glass wall of the chamber, Lyra stood up so quickly the thermal blanket across her shoulders slipped to the floor. She pressed her hand flat against the glass. "No," she said, and her voice was clear enough that the room heard it even through the panel. Caleb turned toward her and tried to give her the look that meant it would be all right, which was the look adults gave children when they were also afraid but did not want to pass it along. It was not a very convincing look. He had never been good at that particular skill. Lyra reached up and touched the silver pendant at her throat. It was small and plain, and he had noticed it before without thinking about it. The kind of thing someone wore every day until you stopped registering it as anything except a habit. The pendant made one sound. It was a soft click, like a key turning in an old door, and every screen in the review chamber went black. The restraint field around Caleb's wrists dissolved. He rubbed his hands together and looked around the room. Vaughn had gone very still. The security captain was looking at the ceiling. Mallark's advocate had stopped speaking mid-sentence and was holding the pause with the expression of someone whose script had just become illegible. Outside the glass, the small black drone descended from the ceiling junction where it had been hovering for days and positioned itself beside Lyra's shoulder with the precision of something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Its lens opened wider and revealed a gold core that Caleb had not seen before. Every door in the chamber sealed with a smooth, quiet sound. The lighting shifted. On the central screen, a symbol appeared, a white crown over a field of stars. Mallark went pale. Not gray, pale. His companions stepped away from him with the careful, instinctive movement of people who have just realized that distance might eventually be their best legal argument. Lyra looked through the glass at the room full of officials who had spent the last hour deciding what her life was worth, and she lifted her chin and she said two words. "Grandmother," she said, "I am done watching." The symbol on the screen expanded. The air above the review floor bent into a column of clear light, and a woman appeared inside it. She was tall and still, dressed in dark ceremonial robes that moved like something with its own intentions, and her skin car. Why the same pale blue silver as Lyra's, but deeper, older, sharpened by decades of being obeyed. Empress Caroline Vera did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The room went to its knees. Vaughn moved so fast his chair tipped sideways. The security captain hit the floor with an impact that was audible. Mallark was pulled down by his own advocate, whose instinct for self-preservation had apparently processed the situation faster than his employers. Caleb stayed standing because nobody had handed him the manual, and because Lyra was still on the other side of the glass looking like she might break if one more person in authority disappeared below her eye level. The Empress looked across the room. Her gaze passed over the kneeling officials with the particular quality of attention that does not require effort, because it has long since stopped encountering resistance. It paused on Malirk with a precision that made him smaller. Then it settled on Caleb. "You are Caleb Walker," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Behind him, Vaughn made a sound that suggested this was not the correct form of address. Caleb did not adjust. The Empress looked at his burned fingers, at his crooked badge, at the grease on his shirt from the panel housing. Then she looked at the jacket around her granddaughter's shoulders, visible through the glass, oversized and worn and still carrying the faint smell of coolant that Lyra had told him she found comforting. "You opened the airlock," the Empress said. "Yes," Caleb said. "Without rank." "Oh, yes. Without clearances." "That is also true." "Why?" There was no particular weight to the question, no expectation of ceremony in it. It was simply a question from someone who had the authority to receive an honest answer and the patience to wait for one. Caleb looked at the glass, at Lyra on the other side of it. "Because she was cold," he said. Lyra pressed her lips together. The Empress was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Bring me the logs," and the room moved. The backup thermal recorder from the corridor junction was pulled within 4 minutes. The data was displayed on the central screen without editorial framing, because the woman asking for it was not someone whose requests were interpreted. The record showed a temperature drop inside the chamber beginning at 14:07. It showed Malirk's house badge accessing the external lock panel at 14:02. It showed a maintenance alert generated automatically by the chamber's environmental system at 14:09 and canceled remotely from a Noble Access terminal at 14:10. It showed Caleb's badge attempts beginning at 14:23 and the manual override at 14:26. It showed the chamber temperature when the door opened. The Empress read the record once, then again. Her face did not change. "Who canceled the alert?" she said. The technician at the side console answered in the voice of someone who had made peace with the professional consequences of telling the truth. "The cancellation request came through a student privilege account registered to House Thorn," he said. Malirk lifted his head from the floor. "Your Majesty, it was a correction exercise, a matter of house discipline. I did not anticipate her biology would respond to the environment as it did." The Empress turned her eyes toward him. "She was 11, the Empress said. The room absorbed that. "You locked an 11-year-old child in a restricted environmental chamber," the Empress continued, with the even quality of someone reading a charge before a verdict that has already been reached. "And when the station's own safety system attempted to generate an alert, you silenced it. And you then stood in a review chamber and argued that the man who opened the door was the problem." Malirk said nothing. His advocate had the look of someone mentally composing a letter of resignation. The Empress turned to Director Vaughn, who was still on his knees and showing no immediate intention of standing. "You refused the thermal records when Technician Walker requested them," she said. Vaughn opened his mouth. "You chose to protect the paperwork rather than examine what the paperwork was concealing," she said, and he closed his mouth again. The Empress raised one hand, and the station screens filled with the royal seal. Her instructions were precise and without ceremony. House Thorne would surrender its advisory privileges pending full inquiry. Director Vaughn was relieved of his administrative authority effective immediately. The station's security division would submit to royal audit. Every protocol that permitted a student without house registration to be ignored, dismissed, or placed in harm's way, because her name was inconvenient, would be reviewed and rewritten before the station received another diplomatic cohort. And the review chamber would be redesigned so that the seats were level. She did not explain the last item. She did not need to. Caleb stood in the center of the room and listened to an empire reorganize itself and felt the particular quiet. Exhaustion that comes after something has gone wrong and then been corrected. The specific tiredness of a problem that should never have existed being resolved by measures that should never have been necessary. The Empress looked through the glass at her granddaughter. Her voice, just for that moment, carried something underneath the authority. "You may come out now, little star," she said. Lyra stepped into the chamber. She walked past the kneeling officials without looking at them. She walked past the empty chair where Maleric had been before the guards removed him. She stopped beside Caleb. She slipped her small hand into his burned one, very carefully, the way you hold something you do not want to drop. He gave her grandmother his lunch with him, she said. The Empress looked at their joined hands. "I know," she said. The official decree went out across Hesterian Exchange Station before the cafeteria opened the following morning. It was not long. It did not use ceremonial language. It said that every person present on the station, student, worker, diplomat, refugee, visitor, guest, or unnamed traveler, would be treated as a person before they were treated as a category, and that any protocol which required a name or a banner or a house registration before basic courtesy was extended would be considered a violation of Dominion standards effective immediately. The station called it the Walker Clause. Caleb found this out when a junior communications officer told him with great excitement while he was trying to fix the beverage dispenser for the 4th time that week. He asked the officer not to call it that. The officer said it was already in the official record. Caleb looked at the dispenser. The dispenser made a sound like it agreed with him that this was not how Tuesdays were supposed to go. 2 days later, Lyra came back to the cafeteria. She was wearing 3 expensive robes that the royal attendants had brought, and she had chosen instead to wear Caleb's work jacket over the top of all of them, which was not a practical choice from a warmth perspective, but which she had apparently decided was not negotiable. He sat across from her. He brought peanut butter, because she had decided on their 4th lunch that peanut butter was either a profound spiritual experience or evidence that human food culture had developed without adequate quality control, and she had not yet determined which. She spread it on a cracker with the focus of someone performing a small, important ceremony. "It still sticks to the roof of your mouth," she said. "That is the point," he said. "That cannot be the point. It is the whole point." She ate the cracker. She thought about it. "It is deeply strange," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "I think I like it. Most people do eventually." Across the cafeteria, the tables had rearranged themselves in ways that were subtle enough that no one had officially acknowledged the change. The noble students who remained after Maleric's removal were sitting with slightly more space between them and slightly less certainty about where exactly the boundaries were. A few of them had nodded at Lyra when she walked in, which was not much, but was more than nothing. One girl had moved her tray to make room at a table that usually would not have had room for her. Small things. The kind of small things that did not make headlines and did not get recorded in official decrees, and did not rearrange the furniture of empires. The kind of small things that were, in Caleb's experience, the only things that actually changed anything in the long run. The Empress arrived without announcement. The cafeteria stood immediately, chairs scraping in a nervous wave across the floor, students straightening, instructors smoothing their robes. Lyra grabbed Caleb's sleeve. "Well, stay," she said. He stayed, half-risen and then resettled, with the specific dignity of someone who had made a choice that was slightly undignified and was committed to it anyway. Empress Saraline walked to their table. She was up close, a woman who had spent so many years being obeyed that she had the specific quality of someone who no longer expected resistance, not because she demanded compliance, but because she had simply forgotten what it felt like to encounter it. "Caleb Walker," she said. "Caleb is fine, ma'am," he said. Several officials behind her experienced visible distress. The Empress sat down. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him with the directness of someone who had not needed to perform interest in another person for a very long time, and was remembering what it felt like to actually have it. "I owe you an explanation," she said. He waited. Lyra was sent here without her title, and without her name because I wanted to understand how this station treated someone it believed had no value. Caleb looked around the cafeteria. Some faces had dropped. Some looked ashamed in the sharp, specific way of people who are ashamed of something particular rather t. Hand something general. He looked back at the Empress. "That is a rough test for a kid," he said. "Yes," she said, "it was." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Lyra was watching both of them. Caleb unwrapped his sandwich. He cut it into 3 pieces. He pushed one toward Lyra, which was already established custom, and then he pushed one toward the Empress. The royal attendants behind her did not know what to do with their hands. The Empress looked at the small triangle of bread and chicken on the table in front of her. "It is turkey," Caleb said, "probably. The station labels are more of a general direction than a promise." Lyra smiled first. The Empress picked up the piece of sandwich. She held it carefully, like something she had not expected to be offered. "Is this a human custom?" she asked. "Not officially," Caleb said, "but where I come from, if you sit at the table, you eat." The Empress looked at the food in her hand, at her granddaughter, who was watching with the specific expression of someone seeing 2 important things happen at the same time, at the cafeteria full of students who were witnessing something they did not have a category for yet. She ate the sandwich. Later, when the story traveled, people would describe Caleb Walker as brave or as clever, or as the man who started an interstellar revolution over lunch. He was none of those things in particular. He was a maintenance technician from Oregon who had a mother who called every Sunday and a sister who sent pictures of her dog in sports jerseys, and a broken beverage dispenser that was going to be his professional nemesis until the day he left the station. He had simply been hungry, and he had noticed someone else was hungry, and he had not found a reason sufficient enough to walk past her. Before the Empress stood to leave, she asked him one question. "Why did you help her before you knew who she was?" she said. Caleb looked at Lyra, who was finishing her peanut butter cracker with great concentration. He thought about his sister on the front steps. He thought about the 11 months of warm penny coffee and broken dispensers, and the particular loneliness of being in a place where you did not quite fit. He thought about a small hand pressed against the cold glass of an airlock door, calm in the specific way of someone who had decided not to make trouble even while the trouble was already happening. Because kids should not have to be important before somebody cares, he said. The Empress was quiet for a moment. Then she stood and the cafeteria rose with her, and she walked back toward the corridor where her attendants and her authority and her empire were waiting for her. At the door, she paused. She did not look back. The Walker Clause stands, she said, to no one in particular and to everyone. The cafeteria settled back into the ordinary sounds of a morning that had become something it had not been when it started. Lyra looked at Caleb across the remains of 3 shared sandwiches and one very seriously considered cracker. She still had his jacket on. He was not going to ask for it back. Do you think she liked the sandwich? She asked. He looked toward the door where the most powerful woman in the galaxy had just walked out. Hard to say, he said. She did not leave any. Lyra thought about that. That is a good sign, she said. He poured himself the worst coffee on the station, which was the coffee that was available, and looked out across the cafeteria where the morning was happening in its small, imperfect, ordinary way. Yeah, he said, I think so too. Outside, beyond the station's hull, the stars were where they had always been, indifferent and enormous and entirely unaware that somewhere in a cafeteria on a diplomatic exchange station, an empire had just begun to understand something it would spend the next century learning to practice. That the size of a kindness had nothing to do with whether you knew the name of the person you were kind to. That rules were only as good as the people who remembered why the rules existed. That sometimes the most significant thing in any room was not the person with the most authority, but the person who noticed who had not eaten. Caleb Walker finished his coffee. He put on his badge, picked up his tools, and went to fix the beverage dispenser. It broke again by afternoons. Some things he had learned required patience. Most things that mattered did. If this story stayed with you, please leave a like and share it with someone who needed to hear it today. Stories like this one are why this channel exists, to remind us that the most human thing we can do is notice the person sitting alone and decide that is not something we are willing to walk past. Subscribe if you want more, and we will see you in the next one.